Hello, my name's Kathy Bissell. Welcome to the Golf Show 2.0. This week we have a friend, a longtime friend, who's written a new book. Gary, why don't you introduce him and tell us all about it?
Well, in honor of our guest who has roots in Pittsburgh, he started out with the paper here and covered the Penn State for a while and covered the Steelers. So I put on the number 39 Willie Parker jersey. He's been retired, about 10 years? I don't know.
Nice.
We've got Glenn Sheeley, best remembered for most people as a terrific golf writer at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Covered a lot of Masters, and he's written a book with one of the great titles of all time, Better Than Lifting Things. Is that right?
Better Than Lifting Things. That is correct, yes.
And how did you get that title? You know, that's a lot better than the book title I've been trying to get John Garrity to write, a friend of mine. I suggested he write the book titled The Robot Who May or May Not Have Won the Masters After World War III. But I like your title better. Tell us how you came up with it.
That one's a little much to crawl over there. That's kind of a long.
Yeah, that was too much. You're right.
The title of my book, Better Than Lifting Things, is a tribute to Red Smith, the famous Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, who in Jerome Holtzman's famous No Cheering in the Press Box book was asked about sports writing, and he said, well, you know, it might not be perfect, but it's certainly better than lifting things. And I always said I wanted to use that as a title if I ever wrote a book, and so here we are. And not everybody liked the title, but it was in my head, so I was going to use it, and now everybody seems to like it, so everything's okay.
No, I like it. I've always said, people asking me about, the job. I say, it beats manual labor.
Sure, that's exactly it. And, every time I'd have a college summer job where I had to do menial labor, I mean, I did not want to do that the rest of my life. And I celebrated the return to school, to knowing that I was studying to do something that didn't involve dirty fingernails. So that was kind of why I wanted to do that from the beginning, and it worked out pretty well.
You get a summer job working in a steel mill in Pittsburgh 25, 30 years ago. You made sure you aspired to something higher, so you didn't wind up there. So
I was in the eastern part of the state then, around Hershey, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And when you're in the summer heat shoveling sawdust out of a smokehouse for a Lebanon bologna company, and it's like 135 degrees in there, you learn to appreciate deadlines and things like that once you've got your degree. So it all worked out pretty well.
Well, your timing was impeccable. And by the way, you seem ageless. You look exactly the same as the last time I saw you, which has been, I don't know, 20 years.
Pushing 20 years. Well, you guys do too. But, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, that I've been out of the newspaper business for a good while now. And in 2005, I took a job at the Golf Club of Georgia, doing membership, actually doing communications and PR in the beginning. Then it evolved into membership. And then after 9 years there, I went to another club, Hawks Ridge Golf Club, worked there for about 2.5 years. So I had a really interesting pairing there where I could appreciate both sides of the job, kind of being on what we used to all call the dark side. It actually turned out to be something that kind of round me out pretty well for, this next phase. And part of the thing, as you know, with writing a book, is having to market yourself a little bit. And we journalists don't like to market ourselves very much. We tend to kind of shy away from that sort of thing, but it prepared me a little bit for this, because you have to do a little bit of talking about yourself and marketing your book and things like that, which we didn't really, that was not part of our life when we were just writing for newspapers or magazines and all that.
Well, it depends on who you were. There's a lot of writers who would love to have a question such as, oh, tell us again how great you are and what you wrote.
Enough about me. What do you think of me?
Yeah. Any columnist in America was pretty much like that.
But when I was at the Golf Club of Georgia, I mean, all of a sudden I was being interviewed for people that were connected with the tournament, marketing our tournaments, which was the Georgia Cup and the United States Collegiate Championship, a really big college golf tournament we started. So I kind of got on the other end of that. And actually, I'm not going to lie to you, I had a couple of times where I asked a guy to read back a quote to me to see how that sounded, and that when anybody used to ask me to do that when I was writing, I thought, come on, but I wanted another look at it, and I appreciated that. So it got me to kind of appreciate the PR end of it. And it's not really the dark side. It's just a different shade. And I enjoyed that part of it. And it was nice to see the contrast between the two things. And as it turns out, it was a good thing to round out everything for me.
Glenn,
Yeah.
why don't you explain kind of the idea of the book and how you have separated the chapters and devoted them to different people or situations?
Well, the book started out kind of more as a friends and family book. It was going to be just sort of, stuff that people around me didn't know from what I did for a living. And as I got more into the stories, starting with, at Penn State, then moving to the Steelers, and then moving to the golf world with the arrival of Tiger Woods in '96. I mean, it was quite a neat little trifecta that I had. And a lot of stories I just wasn't able to get in the paper. They weren't really maybe
Okay.
PG rated enough to be in the paper. And
Yeah.
I had a lot of those collected that just became kind of bar stories to talk to other guys about. But when I finally got down on paper, I realized I've got a little bit more here than I thought I had. And there's some national interest in this. It's not just Pittsburgh and Atlanta, although I think those are the two places that are going to be most interested because it's their teams and their people. But I really, really realized I had something that, these stories are kind of timeless, especially with the Steelers. I mean, those 70s teams, I mean, you can write about them now or talk about them now and nobody cares. It was, 50 years ago. They just don't care. And so a lot of those stories really, really helped when me and Joe Green and Lambert and Chuck Noll and Terry Bradshaw. And when Terry Bradshaw agreed to do the forward for me, that really kind of put it on a little different level where I felt like I had something I could, market a little better than just kind of in my own backyard. And Terry was nice enough to do that. And I was glad I reconnected with him a few years ago. We hadn't really talked that much in the last 20 or so years. And after I stopped covering football at all, I never ran into him. And it's been really fun kind of talking to him every now and then. And it really helped the book and gave it kind of that shot of instant credibility that would be hard to do with a normal kind of memoir book that not everybody knew much about you.
Yeah.
Well,
Except for that part where he said, "My friend George Sheeley, ... That kind of took the edge off the credibility. But except for that.
Yeah, he was, when I was covering the Steelers as a 25, 26-year-old in the mid 70s, I mean, Terry Bradshaw was as big as there was in the NFL. Yeah. And there I am, my first training camp in 1976, after helping out with the team the year before. There I am with the beat. And to have Terry Bradshaw come in after team meetings in the evening and spend an hour and a half with me in there, just shooting the breeze and telling me some inside stuff and helping me. And he needed allies at that point too. He's not, he knows, he was had some criticism too in those years, not too far removed from the Super Bowl years. And it was a good relationship, but that was a really cool thing for me. And then to spend a lot of time around guys like Lambert and Joe Green and people like that. I mean, it was really there was a lot of talent there. We all knew, but we didn't realize they'd be almost, they were Hall of Famers even back then. And you were around it so thickly, you didn't really realize how cool it was at the time, but they meant for some great stories.
Didn't they win 4 Super Bowls?
They did win 4 Super Bowls. Yeah. During that time. Yeah. From like 74 to 79. They did. Yes.
Yeah.
It's too bad more athletes and especially coaches don't get it the way Terry Bradshaw did. Now, in his case, he was looking for friends in the media, but that's all you have to do is be reasonably cooperative.
Yeah.
Throw some guys a bone a little bit. I guess I could throw Tiger Woods into this category. Just be, especially with the columnist at the newspaper, that's the only guy who's really going to ever come after you.
Yeah.
The beat writer is just there to report what's going on.
Yeah.
The columnist is the person you want to have on your side because he's the guy, if you're a coach, he's the guy who's going to call for you to be fired, or if you're a player, he's the guy who's going to call. It's not that hard to call up a guy on the phone once a week, say, "Hey, it's Terry Bradshaw. Do you need anything? You want to talk?"
Yeah.
It would work like a charm, but all these coaches have this bunker mentality, and they just don't get it.
Well, they don't want information to get out either.
And I don't think they realize, like you said, how little they'd have to kind of step towards your way to really help in those situations where you're going to give somebody the benefit of the doubt because, you have that little extra touch with them and you're going to listen a little more closely. And it was that way with Joe Green. It was that way with Jack Lambert. I mean, Joe Green was one of the greatest guys to be around I've ever been around in sports. And I explain in the book where I'm almost happy he didn't become a head coach at some point because I think if he had not had a successful career, it would have really changed the whole image of him in Pittsburgh. And now it's so flawless. He's such a cool guy to remember. And, he did, as you know, have some assistant jobs, and he was, I believe, a coordinator too. But I'm kind of glad he didn't go that extra mile, even though I thought he'd be great, because in the locker room, he was as good as anybody in the league. I mean, he was just tremendous as far as thoughtful comments, and win or lose, the same guy, which you can't say for a lot of people. And, I think that was, for me at that young age, I didn't realize how unique that was. But now looking back after having, 50 years removed, you really realize how special that was. And those guys were pretty nice to deal with, considering how huge they were in the whole world of
Well,
Never mind the
look at that
legendary
media cooperation did for Bradshaw.
Yeah, exactly.
He wind up, he became, an entertainer. He was in movies.
Yeah.
He's been on these football pregame shows, and he had some guys helping him dig up information, but he's almost, I don't want to say he's a comedian, but he's got a sense of humor. He's an entertainer, and he became probably more famous as an entertainer on TV than he was as a great quarterback. So he really played the game.
Not only is his money more huge as an entertainer than it was I think he made maybe $300,000-$400,000 at the most during his time playing pro football. He'd be a $40 million guy now. And these guys, today don't realize, I think, how little those guys made. I mean, I remember doing a story back in the mid 70s when we just had to guess what the salaries were. There were no NFLPA lists. You didn't get all those numbers. I mean, offensive linemen were making like $50,000 a year. I mean, It was insane. And people just today don't realize you got a center making $35 million for a 3-year contract, or a 6-year contract or whatever. I mean, it's crazy. So there's a whole different, having been at the early part of it, I think I really appreciate things now the way they are now more than some guys would. But
let's talk a little golf. When you were in Atlanta, obviously you would have covered all of the sports there, but you
I didn't cover as many Masters as Terry did. I think you had 40, something like that. I think I covered 20, and but it was a little for the Atlanta paper, being kind of the paper of record along with the Augusta paper. There was a lot of pressure there, and as I mentioned in the book, when you write something good, you hope everybody reads it all day. And when you don't write something that you're too proud of, you hope somebody just scoops them up and puts them in a landfill in about an hour.
Is there a worse feeling when something was kind of like, that's all I could do at the time, but it doesn't, writing is kind of a one-way street. You're never happy. The story is never good enough. And sometimes it's really not good enough. And how often did you ever walk away feeling like, boy, that was great? And if you did, you go look at it 5 years later and you go, it wasn't as good as I thought it was. I don't know.
The good thing about newspapers, though, you always had tomorrow to change it.
Well, that's right.
You write a book and screw something up, it's there forever, and we always had tomorrow. I mean, you might be in the bottom of a birdcage the next day, but you always have tomorrow to write the next story and to try to do a little bit better. And one of the great things about writing a book in today's world is they're print to order. I mean, you order a book and that book's printed for you. And if you make a mistake, you can change it. It might take a little while for the run to catch up, but you can change it and go in and get a whole new version of that book without having to put out a new edition. You might have a few copies that might get a little lost in the shuffle till it shakes out, but you can change it. You're not stuck with 5,000 books in your garage that you can't do anything with because they're ruined. And that's that really was kind of one of the reasons why I decided to do the book, because that gave me a little safety net there that, being a newspaper guy, I would have liked to have that next day's column to kind of counteract what I did the day before. So
the Milwaukee airport has a pretty good and unusual used bookstore, Renaissance bookstore. I was rummaging through there, 15 years ago, and I found a master's book by Furman Bisher, the longtime columnist at your paper, legendary master's writer. What did he go to? 60 masters? So I never even heard of this book. I bought it, and it was terrific. He went and visited all these great players, usually at their home. He went to see Ben Hogan at his home. He went to see Byron Nelson and Palmer and Nicklaus, and he talks about driving up. And it's basically an interview story, but it was great. Anyways, I brought it to the Masters the next year after I got it, And as soon as Furman walked in the first day, I came down and said, "Hey, I found this in the recycled bin at this bookstore. Have you ever seen it?" And he burst out, "Ah!" as only Furman would do. And he goes, "I haven't seen that one in quite a while." And he said, "Let me autograph that for you." And he autographed it. And, you know, I could almost get choked up about it. He said, "Gary, I'm proud to have this book in your hands, Furman Bisher." And
nice.
But it was a great book. I wish it had gotten more attention. But you must have at least one Furman Bisher story.
Well, Furman's a chapter in my book, and
excellent.
So I mean, it could have been a longer chapter probably, but I kind of cut it off at some point there. And Furman, you know, a lot of people didn't realize, people that aren't from the South don't really know him other than maybe his old sporting news columns, things like that. And he was a real crusty guy to write, but he was a real softy, you know. And that soft side he didn't show when he had to be Furman Bisher, but you know, he was a really very sentimental guy. And there's a couple things in the book where I remark about how Furman wasn't, you know, he adapted to the computer age pretty well, better than most guys his age would have.
Yeah.
You know, I saved him from disaster more than one time. One time he used to just slug his stories like Bisher for Thursday or Bisher for Friday. You know, he didn't go beyond that because everybody was that guy's job to pick out the right story. And we were at the PGA one year and he wrote a story like Bisher PGA for Thursday. Well, it was like last year's story that was still in computer. And I happened to ask Furman, I think that was Latin. So he covered up that way. But he just, you know, bowled through it and was better than most guys. But I saved him a few times. We were at the Ryder Cup in Spain in '97, and I looked down at Furman's collection of plugs one day that he had stacked up, you know, because we had those European plugs that are different from the UK plugs, are just a mess. And this little flame was like arcing from one plug to the next, and rather scarily. And I said, Furman, let's just unplug that right now. And basically, I probably saved the whole press room from disaster. But you know, Furman he'd just fall all over me when I saved him from all these potential doom. And he was just a great guy to be around. I mean, there were times when he'd drive you crazy because he would say, well, I'm going to write about this. And I'd say, oh, great, we're covered. Well, it turned out he wrote like 2 graphs on that, and the rest of it was wide open.
He veered off.
I'd have to go take over that subject too. And as I said in the book, and if they were going to cut somebody, it wasn't me, the guy who interviewed Shoeless Joe Jackson. So I would always have to kind of watch it at some point about how far I stepped over him. But he was a great guy to be around. And you know, when I was starting out in the business, I mean, I kind of count Penn State as my start, but it was Pittsburgh really, because that was my professional start. And from there, I mean, a lot of the guys I got to end up writing chapters on, guys like John Madden and Don Shula, and then other people. And I was doing baseball a little bit, Mickey Mantle, Tommy Lasorda, Whitey Herzog, people like that. It really meant for a very rounded book. And even Bob Cousy, who I got to meet when I was a kid at the Hershey Country Club working on my off college days. And, you know, so people like that really allowed me to kind of really expand the book to cover, you know, quite a realm of personalities, you know, half of whom aren't with us anymore, but maybe some of the younger people reading the book will get to know a lot about some of these people that they didn't know anything about. So when I got
a favorite Bob Cousy story?
The Bob Cousy story. Well, you know, that developed when he used to come and play at Hershey Country Club every year, spend a week there, play 36 a day, walking 36 holes a day. And I think that's when he was coaching BC at that point. And, you know, there I am, a 16, 17-year-old kid answering the phone, and he goes, hey, Glenn, how's it going? Bob Cousy, what do you have available today? And I said, Cousy, well, who do you got? You know, and that kind of thing for a kid, 20 years old, 19 years old, was pretty cool. And I believe that, you know, he's 93, 94, maybe 95 now. And I sent him a copy of the book a while back, and hopefully he enjoyed it. He probably didn't expect a chapter to be in there on him, but it was pretty cool to meet him. And, you know, the other guys are kind of natural people you're going to have in a book like that, like Palmer and Nicklaus. And that type person. Tiger, I really like the Tiger chapter. But I was not covering golf when the whole disaster happened with his career, and I was really, as I explained in the book, I was really happy not to be involved in it because I would have put me in a real bind, I believe, because my editors who knew how good my relationship was with him would have said, well, you know him, you find out what happened. And well, as you know, Tiger keeps track of who he has good relationships with, bad, and when the smoke cleared from that whole mess, I guarantee you he remembered who was on his side and who wasn't on his side. And I'm glad I wasn't put in that position because
I think he'd already gone a number of years where nobody got inside that inner circle with Tiger.
Yeah.
The inner circle consisted of maybe you could ask him a couple of questions in a scrum on his way out of a press conference, but there was no let's hang out, like Dan Jenkins did.
Yeah.
I think didn't Jenkins stay at the same house with Gary Player or Arnold Palmer during the Masters sometimes or U.S. Open? There was nothing like that with Tiger Woods in the media.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we get those scrums with 10 or 12 guys after the main thing. And, sometimes because I'd always have to do so much stuff on him because of the Masters section, I'd have to set up a lot of one-on-ones with him. And I eventually just gave up trying to go through Mark Steinberg, his PR guy, because that was useless. So I would just say,
Dr. Knows he was known.
Yeah, Dr. No. So I would just say, Tiger, how about Tuesday, a match play after your practice round, blah, 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 and we'd meet. And a lot of times it'd be one-on-one. And I'd always wonder whether Doug Ferguson was going to be snooping around the corner because he had a sixth sense for realizing somebody when Tiger was alone with somebody. I mean, he'd somehow discover it.
He's pretty good.
He had no qualms about barging in and joining either.
Well, I expected that. It didn't happen too often, but I got a lot of one-on-one time with him. And I remember a really cool time when I was at La Costa one year, and he had come off the practice range, I believe, and he said, I don't really have time to sit down. Can you walk with me? And so we went here and there through this lobby and these stairways and past this building and through this cottage and this and that. 10 minutes later, we come out of a stairway to a door. I don't even know where I am. And he goes, you got enough? You okay? I said, yeah, I'm good. And I look around and the security guy, the NFL or the PGA Tour security guy was following us the whole time, all the way through all these 10 minutes through the La Costa development. And I kind of gave him a little nod and he gave me a little nod, and that's the way it was. And which
you were lucky to get that.
Which makes you wonder later when things fell apart, when seemingly nobody knew anything that was happening. I'm really surprised nobody knew about anything was happening because nobody left him out of their sight too long. So,
he really was. I would say, arguably, other than a couple of presidents, he was probably the most famous celebrity on the planet in any field.
And who even remembers that when he was at Stanford, he was mugged on campus.
Really?
And had a knife held to his throat, and got hit with the butt of the knife and could have been killed right there. We never hear anything. Yeah, he was coming back from New York for an award, walking down the street. A guy says, "Hey, Tiger." He grabs a necklace around his neck and hit him with the butt end of his knife, and he lived to tell about it. But imagine how close that could have been to, total disaster and something we never would have known about.
No, also forget his college nickname was Urkel because he wore big glasses and he was apparently the worst dancer in history.
I always wanted Tiger to talk more about that incident. He never did. And, he and Wally Goodwin, who, as you know, was the coach out at Stanford. I mean, they just kind of moved past it. His dad moved past it. And I always wanted to do a little bit more on that story, and they just really didn't want to do anything more on it. But I guarantee you somebody under 40 now doesn't even know that ever happened. And
they didn't want to invite copycats, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, to his credit, he didn't make a big deal about it and moved on. But can you imagine what kind of
I'd be terrified.
It'd be just the worst thing possible. But there's things like that in the book that, I never really talked about too much. And so it gave me an opportunity to do that.
I always wanted to ask him more about his daily life, things that he may or may not have done. I think I did once ask him on the way out of press room in Akron, because he just got a Bridgestone deal. I said, what kind of car do you drive? Have you ever changed a tire? And he looked at me like, I don't know anything about cars, man. But I'd like to know, have you changed a tire? Do you know how to change a spark plug? Have you ever mowed a yard? Have you ever raked leaves? have you ever done the mundane stuff that all of us do, or have you lived? I mean, really, he's lived a privileged life, a famous life, but you wonder at some point, you probably want to do some of this stuff yourself. I don't know, but I've always been curious about that, and I've never been able to ask those questions.
Well, it's kind of funny, he does love to drive. I mean, he loves to drive. Back when one of the World Golf Championships was postponed or delayed because of 9/11, I remember he drove to St. Louis, I think, from Florida or wherever he was.
He drove from St. Louis to Florida.
Yeah, and I always wondered after the accident happened a couple of years ago, why he was driving still. But he loves to drive, and someday we'll find out what happened with all that. But I mean, I guarantee he probably has not changed a tire. I'm pretty sure.
No, probably not. And some of us have, but it's a good life skill to have. So, what other golfers did you either have a great relationship with, or you really enjoyed interviewing them?
Well, it's funny, for a kid who grew up in Arnold Palmer country, I mean, I really got a lot of time around Nicklaus, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the time that he gave me, and again, I had to do a lot of master section stuff.
Yeah,
and I remember even in the tough times, when I'm sure you both remember when his grandson was killed in that sauna accident many years ago. I had gone down there originally to try to do a big master's piece, a hole by hole thing with Jack. And even on that situation, he still gave me like 35, 40 minutes afterwards and sat down, because it was a release for him at that point. So it was probably therapy for him, but it was amazing. We were sitting there all alone in a dining room at a table, just he and I, and it was really cool. And
well, you were kind of the paper of record. No offense to the Augusta Chronicle, but Atlanta paper's big, and as soon as you say Masters preview to Jack or Arnie or Gary Player, they know the game. They know what it's about, and they're in. So they were great at that.
Yeah. And I did. I mean, I remember I was with Nicklaus one time in Atlanta. He was at, I think, the Atlanta Athletic Club for a course consult, and he was struggling with his game then. And I remember one of his famous quotes was, "Everybody's always wanted to play like Nicklaus, and now they can't."
Yeah. Well, you had a great item in your book about Nicklaus winning the '86 Masters, and another famous columnist at your paper, Tom McAllister, great golf writer.
Yeah.
And you had a Tom McAllister line in there that I had never heard, or also very possible I'd forgotten. So tell us about Tom McAllister and Jack at the '86 Masters.
Well, people might or might not know that before that tournament, because Jack was playing so poorly getting into it, that whenever we do our little, how they match up sort of boxes for the Masters, Tom had written a story and said he's basically done. He's gone. He should hang it up. He's too old to win the Masters. Well, as it turns out, that kind of got Jack off his butt, and he ended up playing obviously pretty well. And they put a clipping of that on the refrigerator where they were staying that week. John Montgomery, his friend, put it up there for Jack to look at every day we came back to reach for his nightly ice cream. And he'd read that and get a little more ticked off about it. So it really kind of got him inspired to play a lot better. And when Jack came into the press room that day after he won in '86, the first thing out of his mouth when he sat down was, "Where's Tom McAllister?" And everybody laughed. And then somebody said, "Well, he's still back in the press room finishing up his story on Deadline." And he goes, "Oh, okay." A couple minutes later, Tom walks down the aisle, and Jack goes, "Thanks, Tom." And Tom says, "Anything I can do to help?" And beneath the laughter, Tom says, "Watson wants me to write about him next year." And hardly anybody heard that except the people right around Tom, and I don't think Jack even heard it. And I don't know if I've ever asked Jack about that particular line, but next time I see him, I will. But it was so funny because, it was always considered to be a friendly deal. They had a playful relationship with it. There was nothing, there was no edge to it. Jack knew that he was playing lousy, and, Tom probably, had he had to do over, he might have been a little softer with his pre-comments, but it turned out to be a great story. And Jack always laughed about it. And I always told Jack later, I said, "I don't care how bad you're playing, you're always going to be in that top 50 players to watch." It doesn't matter what you've done coming in. And he had a good laugh about it. It was nothing hard edged. And Tom, it became part of Tom's lore. You know, people wrote about it every year. They still write about it.
Yeah.
Now, where can we get your book, Glenn?
Well, it's available on Amazon. This is the book right here, Better Than Lifting Things, forward by Terry Bradshaw. And you can go on Amazon and get it, or you can go to my website, glennsheeley.com, and there's a spot there to just click to Amazon for the link. That website's up recently. It's not totally done yet. It's eventually going to have some commentary on there. Right now, there's Bradshaw's forward is on there now, and some photos from the book. But you can just click on there and order it right off of there. And it's an ebook, paperback, or hardcover.
And by the way, thanks for not doing a chapter on me. That would not have probably been very good.
Well, it was either you or Hank Gola, and Hank Gola won out on that. Sorry.
I played twice as many courses as Hank, by the way.
Yeah, but
I should mention that to him because
he spent less probably.
He thought he was like, I'm Mr. Golf, and I've played all these courses. He was keeping track. And one day in a bus, somebody said, he said, "Oh, that's quite a few." And he goes, it was like 789 or something. And he looks at me, he goes, "How many have you played?" I said, "Well, I played a lot." I didn't want to say. He says, "Well, how many you played? Do you know?" I said, "Almost 1,500. And he's like,
wow.
Totally deflated. I didn't want to tell him, but he forced me into it.
Knowing Hank, that ruined his day, I'm sure. It really did.
There's the one person that we have talked to who has an app and a website where you can track all the golf courses that you've played around the world. And what is it, Gary? You're number 5 or 6 on the list, is it?
I did a story. I was number 2 of the people who, when I first was joined, number 2 of all the 35,000 members, and then I've slid down to like 6 or 7 now. But I'm gaining because a couple of guys ahead of me died. So I'm within like 20 of one of the dead guys to get into like 6th place, and the next number is like 250 courses away. It's like, yeah, never mind.
That's impressive. Well, I bet Hank will lead you in free golf, though. I'd be willing to bet that.
Well, yeah, he probably leads me in self-loathing too about his golf. I've never seen a guy on the golf course just always be hating himself the whole round, and then on the 18th green, it's like, hey, that was great fun. Hey, let's play again. He suffered through his own game because he loves it so much, like all of us do. We've all been there. He wasn't playing as well as he'd like a lot of the time, and he was just but when he got done, he was happy as a clam. So he's the kind of guy, that's the kind of guy golf needs. He loves the game.
Well, I talked another thing in the book where, the best words you can hear in the golf course are "you're all taken care of," and the worst 5 words you can hear are "will you be paying separately?" And I don't think Hank's heard that last one too often. But we're all very fortunate. We're all very fortunate to be able to play these incredible courses. Usually the Monday after a tournament. Usually at Sunday pins, which was really cool. And I played Augusta once. I'm sure you played it at least once. I played St. Andrews once. I think I played them both in the same year, which is really good. But I would write about those sometimes when it was a really famous thing like that. But typically, I didn't draw too much attention to it. But we were very lucky to be able to do that. And, one of the things that I wanted to point out that there's a lot of chapters in this book. I think Bob Cousy is kind of a surprise chapter. There's, some of the baseball people that people might not expect me to be writing about. Maybe an O.J. Simpson's a surprise chapter to some people. Whitey Herzog, that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of things in there that, sometimes people don't really realize until you start to assemble the things you have. And that was one of the things that I realized along the way. There were a lot of people that I had no other way to get into whatever I want to write about. And when my wife had a store in Roswell, Georgia, she would carry Jane Seymour's collection of scarves and towels and everything else. And 3 years in a row, she came to the store as a guest appearance to spend a few days and all this. And I didn't realize this, but her husband, James Keach, was not only a producer, the guy who produced Walk the Line, he was also the state trooper in the famous Vacation scene where the guy pulls over Chevy Chase and says, "Get out of the car, you son of a bitch," and accuses him of animal cruelty. And so he says, "Do you know the penalty for animal cruelty in this state?" And he says, "I don't know." He says, "Well, it's probably pretty stiff." And so I got to know James a little bit, and I took him to play golf at Golf Club of Georgia when I was working there. And we were on about the fifth hole, and he made kind of a sloppy drop near a hazard or whatever. And I said, "James, you know the penalty for an illegal drop in this state?" And he goes, "No." And he's laughing. I said, "Well, it's probably pretty stiff." So we had a big chuckle with that. But I mean, how often you get a book together with, Joe Green, James Keach, and Bob Cousy? I mean, that's a pretty good run there.
Well, how often did you ever mention Jane Seymour in any story? Well, she was what? Something Quinn, Medicine Woman. What was that show she was on?
Jane Quinn, Medicine Woman, yes. And at the time, she had just done Wedding Crashers, which was a really cool movie too. And my wife ended up getting a painting from her, and on the back of it, she signed "Done whilst at Wedding Crashers," and she put her little kitty cat name that she went by. So it was real cool, because the first dinner with her, we sat like across the room. The second dinner, we sat at the other side of the table. And then finally, in the third year of the dinner, I sat next to her, which all my friends accused me of just like accosting this woman and plunking next to her. But it was actually set up that way. But she was very nice and very unassuming. And they're divorced now, but she was married to him back then. And she is a very nice lady. And for her age, still looks tremendous.
Well, as you can tell, Glenn has spanned the globe like Wide World of Sports in this book. Better Than Lifting Things, available on Amazon.com. The Steelers, Penn State, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, the Masters, Jack, Tigers, got everything. So go check it out. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Kathy. And you can go to the website or on Amazon and find it pretty easily.